Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 921B, and today's date is March 17th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Stockpiles Military Assets Near China to Respond to Threats by Russia and China. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, out in Ukraine, it looks like things are really starting to heat up. We see the deputy head of the Special Monitoring Mission, the SMM, of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Alexander Hug, has said that any movement of troops of the parties to the conflict in the Donbass region to the adjacent territory will be regarded as a violation of the Minsk Accord. He said that Ukraine military has now advanced to the gray zone and hoisted the Ukrainian flag on their positions. And he put this on record, saying this is a complete violation. Now, we know things are starting to heat up because who is back in the picture? Well, Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. She is back in. And remember, the U.S. was not part of the Minsk II ceasefire agreement. It was France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia. But the United States was there for the coup d'etat, which Victoria Nuland, with the help of George Soros, they were able to overthrow the elected government and put in a puppet government. Well, she is out there once again, and she is stressing that the Russian Federation and its proxies should not expect the Ukraine parliament to amend the country's constitution before the implementation of security provisions of the Minsk agreement. Now, the Minsk II ceasefire agreement is very clear. They're supposed to follow these steps, and part of the steps was changing the constitution. And she went on to say neither Moscow nor self-appointed Donbass authorities should expect the Ukrainian Rada to take up key outstanding political provisions of Minsk, including elections, constitutional amendments, before Russia and its proxies meet their basic security obligations under the Minsk agreement. And as of right now, they have. But what Ukraine wants is they want peacekeepers in the Donbass area. Now, this was not part of the agreement. They have the OSCE there. They're monitoring the situation. And we can see Ukraine has been stalling all along. This is why we see Obama out there calling on Russia to make sure they adhere to the Minsk II ceasefire agreement. This is why Kerry now is going to Russia. And Russia wants to understand why they're not fulfilling the Ukrainian deal. Now, it's very strange why they don't have Ukraine going there, because Ukraine is the country. But it looks like the United States is the puppet master in Ukraine. And this is why they called the United States and asking them why this hasn't been done. Now, Victoria Nuland, as we know, she handled the whole coup d'etat, the uprising in Ukraine to put in the puppet government. And we can see at this point, if she's back in the picture, this means things are really going to heat up. Now, we understand that the United States government central bankers, they're moving military assets all over the place, preparing for war. Now, the U.S. Army, they announced plans to stockpile munitions and military supplies in Vietnam, Cambodia, and several other undisclosed nations, including the Philippines, because the U.S. is preparing for aggression from China and Russia. U.S. officials state that the munitions that they're placing all around here is to respond to the regional threats by Russia, North Korea, and China. Now, we know that China is pushing for sanctions on North Korea. Russia is yelling at North Korea. They're trying to separate themselves. But the United States wants them involved because the players are all the same. And we see right now that they're very worried about China expanding their influence in the area. Translation: spreading their economic influence throughout the area, bypassing the dollar, making deals with other countries. And we can see at this point they're very nervous about this, and they know the system is crumbling. Their orders are to start a war, provoke a war at any cost, because as the system comes tumbling down, they need to blame someone. They need to take all eyes off of them, and this is what they're doing at this point. We see U.S., Germany, France. They're very critical of Israel, of their land grab in the West Bank. France is extremely concerned of the latest seizure of territory. They're saying that Israel has announced that they're seizing a large chunk of Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. The UN Secretary is warning Israel that this is a violation of international law. And I wouldn't be surprised if another offensive or something occurs in this region once again. And of course, they're just going in and taking the people's land. And we've seen this many times throughout history, where the nation with the power suppresses the smaller people in the area and they exterminate them. And this is continually going on throughout the world. Nothing has really changed. Now, we know a watchdog group is looking into war crimes in Yemen. They are looking at Saudi Arabia, where they're getting the weapons. And they've already said to the U.S., listen, you should stop supplying Saudi Arabia with these cluster bombs because they're in violation. Saudi Arabia is killing many citizens, about 6,000 civilians. And we see already Dutch lawmakers, they voted to ban weapons that they're sending to Saudi Arabia. We see the United Kingdom, not so much. The United States, not so much. And we see the United Nations, they are saying that the Saudi-led troops, they've killed civilians, children, women in this war on purpose. And we see at this point, let's see what England does. Let's see what France does. Let's see what the U.S. does. But we know they have an agenda. We know they need to get back into Yemen, install the puppet regime. We know they need to do this in Libya, Lebanon, Iraq. And they're trying to get into Syria, then eventually Iran, because they need to keep this petrodollar system alive. Think about what they have to do to keep their system alive. They have to kill the people in these countries so the dollar stays alive, so the system can be propped up for a little while longer. So entire families are being wiped out for paper and ink. This is not the government that I want. This is not the government I support. This is not a government for the people. Any people. This is just downright horrific. And when people look back in history, they're going to look at this and they're going to say these are all war crimes. And most likely there will be charges brought against most of these people. Listen, during World War II, the people in Germany, this is the way it was. Yes, everything's awesome. Everything's perfect. We're conquering the world. And then when they lost, all the other nations looked at them and said, these are war crimes. These people need to be prosecuted. The same thing's going to happen again. But most likely it's going to be here in the United States. Now, we realize at this point that the United States government, the coalition forces, they are pushing as hard as they possibly can to get that unity government into Libya. And they want them to go into Tripoli, and they want them to remove the government in Tripoli. So the European Union, they have agreed to impose sanctions on 3 Libyan politicians for opposing the UN-imposed government. So there's sanctions on the GNC president, the president of Tobruk Parliament, the prime minister of the Salvation Government. And we see the government in Tobruk is saying that, well, we're not members in the EU and we do not follow it. I refuse the EU threats against all Libyans. And they're saying that it's meaningless to us, these sanctions. And he blamed England, who is working on a plan to divide Libya. And we see that, yes, this is all part of their plan. They want that government, which is elected by the people, out of power. They want their puppet government in power so they can bring in the coalition forces to regain control of the entire country and go after those people who oppose them. It's the same thing that's happening in Yemen. That will be happening in Lebanon. Now we see out in Turkey, Germany decided to close their consulate in Istanbul. They're shutting it down because of terror warnings. The German school in Istanbul has also been closed, and things are really heating up in Turkey. It looks like Erdogan is going full dictatorship on everyone in there. They're going after journalists, teachers, anyone that disagrees with the government or reports on the government in what he is doing. This is what they go after. They shut down social media. They shut down news sites. And this is full-on dictatorship. This is what it looks like. Now, it looks like Congress put John Kerry, the State Department, and they backed them into a corner. And I like when the corporate media comes out and says, Secretary of State John Kerry has unexpectedly determined that, yes, the Islamic State is committing genocide against Christians and other minority groups in Iraq and Syria. Well, they knew this. They were asking them for quite a while to say that the Islamic State is committing genocide. But they didn't want to mention this because they were using them to get Assad out. And we see that Congress put pressure on Kerry, even though they're saying they didn't. They did. And what was the State Department going to do? Say, no, we don't see this? They had to say yes at this point, because they had ample time to analyze all of this. So now we see that the State Department is backed into the corner. Russia now has the State Department talking to Assad, trying to come up with an agreement. Now, NATO, they have brought more ships into the Aegean Sea. 2 more warships have joined NATO in the Aegean Sea. The Dutch multipurpose frigate and the French corvette. They've joined the British amphibious ship and 4 other warships assigned to the German-led Standing NATO Maritime Group 2. Now, this is a total of 7 warships in the Aegean Sea at this point, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away from the entire Mediterranean area. So if something goes down, they are ready to move. Now, of course, they're using the cover story that it's for the refugees, and this is why they're there. No, they're pre-positioned. They're ready. We see that during the peace talks, the opposition groups, they have one agenda. It's not about humanitarian aid. It's about the transition of Assad. Now remember, the transition of Assad will be made by the people. They already said 18 months from now there will be elections to see if Assad stays or goes. Now this might change, but this is what they've done so far. But we can see from Geneva 1, Geneva 2, now Geneva 3, they are doing the same thing. The entire agenda is how do we get Assad out of there. Now, Syria completely rejects the Kurdish declaration of federal region in the north. And it looks like the Kurdish region, they've taken a vote. And they're saying, yes, we are ready to be autonomous. And of course, I don't know if there were any international monitors monitoring this vote, because we're getting word that there's a lot of Kurds out there saying, no, we don't want this. And we can see the Kurds weren't invited to the talks on purpose. Now, Russia is coming out saying they are not agreeing with the federalization. The U.S. is actually coming out and saying they don't agree. But if it's brought up in the peace process, then it might be okay at that point. So we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully, because we realize that the U.S. is cozying up to the Kurdish people. They're building 2 runways there. And we know their main objective is to partition Syria into different areas. And not just Syria, but the entire Middle East. They want a Shiite, Kurd, Sunni type of structure. And this way they'll be able to control all the different regions. And this is what they're trying to accomplish at this point. So we're going to have to watch that situation very, very carefully and see where this moves and where it ends up. Because if these peace talks do not work out, we know the U.S., the coalition forces, Saudi Arabia, plans are already in motion. And we've seen Geneva 1, Geneva 2, they have not worked out at all. And the same agenda is on the table. So I'm not very positive about this, but we'll wait and see. We see the U.S. military, they're out there saying, okay, if we get into war with China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, the U.S. is not ready for this. U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley, he is speaking to the House Armed Service Committee, and he's saying that we cannot take on these countries at this point. We are not at the levels that can execute satisfactorily in terms of time, cost, in terms of casualties, or cost in terms of military objectives against these countries. It just won't work. We will lose. And I agree with him. The U.S. has been in war for a very long time throughout the Middle East. In Africa, troops have been spread all around this globe. And the troops are tired. And we can see at this point, we're facing massive shortages. We are down 500 fighter pilots. And they're saying the gap is expected to widen to more than 800 as we go into 2018, 2019, 2020. We see the soldiers are completely exhausted. We see everything that we have right now has been drawn down. And we see the American people, they're exhausted. We do not want war. That's the furthest thing from our mind, going into war. We'd rather have all our troops back here at home with their families, living a life here in America, not abroad. But we see the U.S. government central bankers, they have a different objective. Their objective is to conquer the world. Their objective is to cover up the system they built and created. The system that cannot last. A system that is collapsing. A system that is dying right now, and they know it. And every single time these fiat systems die, the central bankers, the governments that report to the central bankers always do the same thing. They start war. They move your eyes to a different location so they are not to blame. And this is what they're doing at this point. This is what it looks like when we watch a dying empire. This is what we see when we see a dying empire. As we move along, we see everything start to break down. We see the troops being spread out further and further, where they can't be pushed anymore, where they rely on other countries to help out, where they try to start wars, but the U.S. can't win any wars anymore. Think about it. What was the last time the U.S. really went up against an adversary that would be a major problem? We haven't seen it in a actually probably World War II. Ever since then, we haven't seen any. We haven't been fighting any. We've been going into countries where we're able to walk in, overrun them, and replace the governments. And at this point, with our troops exhausted, our military assets all drawn down, where we can't create fighter jets or destroyers or anything that actually works in combat, we have a major problem on our hands. But these psychopaths, these central bankers, the U.S. government, they're just continually pushing for war. They believe in their heads that they're going to come out victoriously. They don't care how many people die. Remember, they have no allegiance really, except for to themselves, to profit, to debt, to those people who run the central banking system, the top of the system, the Rothschilds. And we see at this point that if and when they see themselves losing, I don't think they'll have any problem firing off nuclear weapons. Because at this point, they realize they have the bunkers. They have the ability to hide. And according to their plan, a nuclear war would reduce the population. According to their plan, they'll be able to come out of their bunkers and restart the system. Doesn't mean they're going to win the war, but this is what they're thinking of. This is how they think. And this is what we need to stop. We need to go to the root of the problem and get rid of the central bank. We need to get rid of those people who are not working for the people of the United States. And every country needs to do the same thing. If your government is not working for you and for the people and working for a corporation, working for a central bank, it needs to go. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.